Alrighty, we are now recording. So, welcome everyone to WorkSmart Live. My name is Marissa Wayman. I'm your marketing manager here at WorkSmart. And we have Dawn Church, the fabulous events manager at WorkSmart.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for your patience. My cat knows how to let himself into this room. He knows how to open the door, and I forgot to put the weight in front of the door, so he couldn't get in. Back to the webinar. So as Marissa said, welcome to today's WorkSmart Live session. This is to security and beyond, and I am Dawn Church. I'm WorkSmart's events manager. And thank you so much, Marissa, for joining us today. And while I'm at it, thank you to all of you for joining us. And a big thank you to the Durham Chamber of Commerce for coordinating with us to make this event open and available to all of our chamber members. So today we are talking about cybersecurity, and it's always a really big conversation topic around here at WorkSmart. The landscape is always changing with new technologies and lots and lots and lots and lots of new normals, especially right now, whether we're talking about how we work or where we work. So new technologies and new ways of working can be really amazing things, right? But new, different, change, all of these words are a hacker's best buddies too, right? So how do you keep your business safe and protected while also staying productive amidst ever-evolving newness, especially as a future-forward thinking business? So we're going to talk about that today. There are 5 fundamental principles, your old faithful favorite toys, if you will, that you can come back to time and time again and use as a lens or a touchstone to continually be updating your cybersecurity plans. So no matter what new arch-nemesis hackers there are out there on the playground, you always have these 5 pillars to come back to. So we're going to go over those, and we're going to talk about how they apply today and tomorrow and beyond. And in case you haven't noticed yet, we have some Toy Story puns going on today in today's episode, so it should be a really fun webinar. So send us your questions, and Marissa, you ready to take it away?
Let's do it. Let's talk about protecting the galaxy. So as Dawn mentioned, we're going to talk about cybersecurity today, and it's a priority. We know this. We know that we need to protect ourselves from the cyber threats that continue to grow. But what does that mean for small business? It can be complicated for a number of reasons for small businesses to navigate. And it's really about, they all come down to limited resources, whether it's the lack of internal security experts or the budget. Simply the budget could be an issue. But today on WorkSmart Live, what we're going to do is dive into what's called the NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which was built to help companies navigate and plan security, IT security, that is. We're going to talk about the abbreviated version. When Dawn and I were preparing for this conversation, I kind of mentioned it as the Cliff's Notes version, because what we're going to focus on are the most important components of this framework to give you this solid security plan so that you know how to address this modern workplace security conversation. All right, so let's get into it. These 5 pillars, as Dawn mentioned, or you've seen in the invitation, they are the key to that solid IT security plan. Again, this is very abbreviated, so if you're familiar with the NIST framework, you've got these 5 overarching categories, and then within those are subcategories and objectives to help you really hone in detailed on how to protect yourself. So as a basic understanding, because today we're going to talk high level and we're going to talk about the keys for a small business, but you're going to start with this identifying or understanding how your business operates and what threats are applicable to your organization. That will help you build the foundation for the safeguards to protect you from incidents, essentially attacks getting past your defenses, but then the detection or that surveillance for when something goes wrong, and then the steps to respond so that you can contain the attack, and the goal of it all, which is to recover to go back to normal business operations. So that's how these pieces all work together. But when we talk about the modern workplace, as Dawn mentioned, and if you've joined us before, you've heard this once or twice from us, but there are these pieces that remain tried and true, regardless of how we're working, whether it's 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago. They've worked for us. We're going to talk about those, but we're also going to talk about and pay attention to how we have changed the way we work and how that impacts our cyber defenses. So, the big one is the number of devices connecting to our data is growing. More devices per person. I think my kids have 18 devices per person. You also have this idea of more devices just needed for functionality. We've got Zoom rooms, we've got conference rooms with Surface hubs set up, Microsoft Surface hubs set up. You have cloud applications, so your data is living in multiple places. There's also something that I don't know if you've all been aware of, but we've had this sudden maybe massive shift to remote work. And that has complicated things because, like I said, your data is in multiple places, but now your protections that you may have really invested in the office don't apply the same way to somebody who might be working from home. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple of you are working from home.
Maybe.
Just
maybe.
The other thing I want you to think about during this discussion is something that we haven't talked about traditionally with small businesses until recently. And that is this concept of how do you know if your defenses are effective? So obviously, if you're hit with ransomware and your data is encrypted and you can't access it, you know your cyber defenses fell apart at some point. But modern threats linger in your environment longer before they cause damage. That means they're waiting purposely undetected, and oftentimes they're gathering information to make the impact as very painful. And those traditional tools are good for stopping them from coming in, but if they get through, they're not going to tell you they're there. So this idea of traditional security tools alone can't keep up with the evolving threats. So I'll weave these in as we kind of talk about our old faithful toys versus the new and better toys that get combined together to help us protect our environments. So we'll definitely talk more about that. I don't think we have any questions. Dawn, stop me if we do. Otherwise, I'm just going to go straight into the beginning of this, which is we need to know what we have in order to protect it. The first step in protecting yourself from a cyber attack is to take inventory of what you have. Knowing where your data is and how you store it and who has access to it is key. If you have personal sensitive information, you want to know exactly where that lives on your network. You want to either group it together, you want to create policies so you know where it is. Then once you know where your data lives and how it lives in your environment, who can access it, defining the value of it to the organization will help you understand how much it would cost you if you lost it or if it was exposed. Because remember, a cyber attack doesn't necessarily attack the same way every time. It could lose it completely, or it could expose sensitive information. So knowing those malevolent factors will help you know what that cost to lose it is. But then you also want to think about, now that you know what data you have and you know the value of it, think about who might want access to that data. Is it a competitor? Is it just somebody in the darkest parts of the internet who just wants to make money off of selling your credential list? And then thinking about the ways that someone might try to obtain it. And we'll talk a little bit more about these threats here in a second. Of course, if you have any legal or regulatory requirements, you're going to need to know about those. Biotech, biopharma, legal firms that have to hold on to data for a certain period of time, those are obviously going to impact the way you prepare. And what you're doing with all of this information is building that platform to prepare appropriately. Now, I mentioned thinking about who may want access and how they may obtain it. Let's talk about those bad actors for a second, because cybersecurity attacks threaten you and your data by affecting the confidentiality, by accessing private information, the integrity of your data by either destroying it or altering it, but also the availability by stopping you from working. So that's that kind of concept of if you lose it versus expose it. And knowing these methods of what criminals use to attack you will give you a meaningful way to prepare. So these are a few of them. We've got ransomware, phishing, malware, zero-day threats. Keep in mind that a lot of these work together.
Marissa, what's a zero-day threat?
Good question. So a zero-day threat is a threat that is so new, your software that detects these known threats doesn't know about it yet. That is a zero-day threat. A brute force attack, this might also be something that's not as common, so I'll go ahead and answer that one. But these are attempts to compromise your credentials by utilizing, typically it's a computer software that cycles through all of the endless possibilities to get into to crack the code, if you will. So that's that. I'll try again and again until I get in. My favorite one is I'll make you pay. Ransomware, where it crypts your data. But I could probably do voices for each one of these. So let me know if you have any other questions.
I think we'll save that for Q&A. That's my question, Marissa, is can you come back and do all of these again at the end?
I'm harmless, I swear. So now that we talked about these potential threats, and as I said, knowing the threats that can impact your business and knowing the data that you have will help you plug any gaps in security. But remember, while industry trends are important, it's also just as, if not more important, to pay attention to internal bad actors. Now, I use bad actor because I don't always like to call them criminals or cyber attacks, because, well, I guess no matter what I say, it sounds negative. But I want to remind you that it's not just malevolence or malcontent that leads to people compromising you from the inside. A lot of times it's just a lack of understanding. It's a mistake on a worker's part. So keep that in mind, that your employees tend to be your number one risk and they don't even know it. Something else when it comes to knowing your risks is to engage with your IT team or your cybersecurity partner to really help assess that risk. Because once you hone in on that risk, you can really make a succinct plan with the right tools, the right people, and the right policies. Some of the things that a cybersecurity partner can help with is assessing that risk and something that's called managed risk services. This idea that risk assessment, according to Gartner, by 2022, organizations that adopt this kind of risk-based vulnerability approach, so they're always trying to identify the holes and the risks that are most appropriate for them, they will suffer 80% fewer breaches. So in just a couple of years, 80% reduction in breaches is awfully attractive. You know, it's always, as your digital risk grows, it's important to always look for ways to reduce your opportunities for attack. So I want to, before I go on to the vulnerability scans, I kind of want to address this managed risk, because I think this is something that's a little bit newer for small businesses, but has been around in enterprises. It's the managed risk is a monthly service that helps you look for those opportunities to reduce risk. So we're talking about continually scanning your network, assessing the risks to understand how the potential security threats could impact your business, and then immediately taking action with a customized plan so that you can continue to move your the bar higher in protecting yourself. So for organizations that have higher security threshold or is looking to improve their security posture, and they have a lot of the really solid components that we're going to talk about, this is another way to amp up your security. Now, part of that managed risk that we talked about was actually the vulnerability scanning, which is an application that identifies and creates an inventory of all of your systems. So we talked about that, your servers, your desktops, all of the devices, how you access your data. So it looks for all of those in the network, but it also then takes a step and looks at the software that's running on it, the accounts, the user accounts that are there. And then once you've built that inventory, that scan checks each of those items against databases for known vulnerabilities. So if you're familiar with the way traditional antivirus works, it's very similar. You're going against a database that knows about vulnerabilities, and it's kind of taking a check mark to say, okay, we're good here, we're good here. This is something you need to be aware of. Once you have those reports, you can prioritize and make changes. The taking that one step further is penetration testing. This is actually the act of trying to exploit weaknesses in your systems. So we talked about an application, doing a checklist. This is actually going one step further, and at the most basic level, it's like simulating cyber attacks against your computer systems so that you can find the holes. So vulnerability scans, a good step. As part of managed risk, that's kind of a 24/7 thing that's running all the time. But there are industries that are required to do it only quarterly, and so some choose to do that. Penetration testing takes you that one step further. I'm going to take a step here because we did talk about a couple of things that were newer, a little bit more technical. See if there are any questions before we talk about planning for the risks.
We don't have any questions in the queue right now, but please feel free to send questions in if you do have them.
Yes. So we talked about finding those risks. Then, of course, the next step is to actually use the insight to develop or refine your security strategy. And I always remind people that there are so many tools out there to keep you safe. For small businesses, it's important to balance those tools with policies and process. A lot of things can be taken care of by setting the right expectations. And a security policy should cover the roles and responsibilities for anybody that interacts with your systems, whether it's employees, vendors, and then it should also then define the steps that it takes to protect those systems from an attack. And remember, we talked about the little circle, the 5 pillars. We're protecting and then limiting the damage if one occurs. So it should address the protect and the respond. Policies and procedures, they're used to define, like I said, these clear expectation from management on how they want users to use resources, whether they're vendors or internal users, how they expect that those systems to be used properly so that we can protect everyone. Those policies are also great for training employees, new employees, on your expectations, but also it helps aid in the investigation of an attack. So super important to have. Of course, the scope and the breadth of the policies are going to vary based on the type of business that you are. For regulated industries, you'll have a lot more to cover. But no matter who you are, the best advice that I can give is to start with what you are doing. If you're documenting your security plan, don't overreach for your dream position. What goes on paper should be what you are doing. as opposed to making it a very pretty narrative that is fiction. And of course, the best, well, I shouldn't say the best advice because I just gave you the best advice. The next best advice is to make sure that you're reviewing and revising it, because you can't set it and forget it. Our businesses are changing, our data is changing, the people change. All of those are reasons to go back to the drawing board to look at your cybersecurity policies to make sure that you're covered in the way that is most appropriate for you. So we know our data, we know our devices. So how do we protect them? Now we have to create these security policies, but how do you protect your data? So it's next on our list. Surprisingly, we're going to move on to protect. Except, hold on, we're not going to do anything until you've trained your users. Remember when I told you your users are your #1 risk? Awareness is the only way to protect against those threats. Security should just be a part of your business. It's not just a part of IT. And you create a culture of security awareness with a top-down approach. Let's play a quick game. I've stolen this game from other webinars, if you've played before. What should your security awareness program include? I'm going to give you a couple of options. Monthly or quarterly interactive training to teach your people how to detect issues so they can be aware. Targeted emails or newsletters that are just about a particular subject that helps to encourage good behavior or good security hygiene, as we're so used to washing our hands and keeping up with good hygiene. Why not add security to it? Or how about skills testing to reinforce behavior? And my favorite multiple choice option, all of the above. And if you guessed all of the above, you are right. The answer is all the above. It is a trick question, I know, so hard to follow along. But these are the components to a successful security awareness training program. And a lot of companies have a version of security awareness training that you can subscribe to. So you have the experts collate all of the training modules, the information to share, and the phish testing to intentionally phish your users to see who's phish prone. And I'll use this opportunity to shamelessly plug next week's WorkSmart Live, Phish Proof. Join us to teach your users to become phish proof. I want to say not fish food, but that would be insinuating that cyber criminals are fish and your users would be their food. But we're not. We're going to make them phish proof because phishing emails are becoming harder to distinguish from the real ones. And not surprisingly, these scams are becoming more and more prevalent as we go further into the pandemic. And the good news is that we can learn to spot a scam. So join us next week. You'll learn more.
Yeah, I think you keep thinking of fish food because that's a Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Yes.
I keep having the same thing play in my mind too.
I'm so glad we're connected that well, that we're both thinking of fish food. Once your users are educated, it's now time to start controlling and limiting access to the systems so that you're ensuring that only the right people, the people you've intentionally given permission to, can access them. Strong passwords, not a new topic. We obviously don't want to use password 123. Most likely, your organization already has a policy in place that makes sure that you update your passwords regularly and that you use a complex password that's different characters, at least 8 characters long. And the idea there is to prevent people from guessing your password. And guessing your password doesn't mean that they stop at one failure. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but brute force attacks work by typing endlessly the combinations of characters until hackers luck into your password. implementing a policy to kind of suspend or disable an account after repeated login attempts eliminates that risk. And your IT team likely has that already set up. But as we discussed, we're accessing our data from more places. So how can we beef up the security that we already know and love? Well, the new toys to help. Longer passwords are more secure. And don't grumble right away, because longer passwords doesn't mean it has to be a bunch of random characters. A passphrase is 4 or more random words grouped together and used as a password. Easier to remember for the user, harder to crack. A longer password, even if it's just simple words and no special characters, will take longer to crack and will require more computational resources. So even if if a hacker gets your encrypted password on the dark web from a hacked company, they won't. The idea is that they won't have the computing power and the time needed to crack that. So it's a change, and if you search the internet, the FBI, NIST are all supporting this idea of long passphrases, but it is taking time to shift because we have been told for years to strengthen security passwords by increasing complexity. On top of password security, you've got password management, and we're not talking about sticky notes. I know you all know that, but what we're doing is, well, not what we're doing. I would say that providing a password management tool is actually often overlooked, but it's a really easy protection measure. When you give people a tool to adequately and securely store their password, it lets them offload remembering a password, which keeps them from recycling insecure passwords. On the same level of authentication, we said cyber criminals can easily steal passwords. So adding a second step to verify your user's identity is important because a compromised password not only grants them access to whatever the user has in their account, but it can also lead them to getting onto your network and getting into other things. So we always encourage multi-factor authentication whenever possible. And most modern software has this, is baked right into it and also encourages it. So if you're using Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft 365, there's a lot of really cool capability to enable this and to make sure that it's easy to use and less of a pain to your users. Which actually brings me to my next piece, which is managing users in the cloud. When you have resources that are internet accessible, you're increasing your exposure level. All anyone needs is an internet connection to browse to your service and log in. Whereas if you're in the office and you're required to be physically in the office, it's harder for someone to walk into your office and pretend to be Marissa because my voice is well known, I'm loud. So it being on the internet, it being cloud facing is riskier. So how do we make sure that those accounts are just as secure as the ones that we have for years been managing on the network? Well, the answer is by taking those same practices of central management and applying those to your cloud services. And if you joined us earlier in this series, we did a whole webinar about managing users in the cloud through Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which helps you take what you're doing in your office and extend it to the cloud. And it goes beyond just Microsoft applications. It actually works with thousands of other third-party applications. But also we talked about Microsoft Intune, which helps organizations, and I get more excited the more I learn about Intune, but it helps you give access to resources anywhere, almost on any device, but also while helping to keep that company data secure. If you've ever tried to roll out mobile device management to your users, you'll know that your users typically don't want you to install something on their personal device because they're afraid of of a big brother feel. Intune actually lets you do it at the application level so that if there's data in your OneDrive that you don't want to be accessed outside of the office, you can start to build policies to do that and to enforce that, even if they're not in the office. So this is, the more services you have in the cloud, the more we need to rethink the way that we're controlling user access.
So Marissa, before you move on from strong authentication, apparently I can't talk today. Couple questions here.
Yeah.
So one, can you explain a little bit more about the difference between how we were recommending complex passwords and what that meant, and now why and how we're recommending memorable passwords or passphrases? Can you just explain a little bit more about the difference and the why we're doing that now?
Absolutely. So let's back it up about 3 or 4 years ago when Marissa was an account manager with WorkSmart. One of the basic security principles was complex passwords, and we would audit your Active Directory or where your passwords are managed, the policies that manage your organization's passwords. And we would check boxes to make sure that your users had to create these complex passwords. They were typically 7 or 8 characters or more characters long. That's the length component. We wanted it to be long, so it took more resources to crack. We wanted it to be random. So again, somebody couldn't say, all right, well, Marissa, her name is Marissa, so let's try Marissa and a couple of numbers that are somewhat familiar to her and see it like her birthday or her kid's birthday, and then try to use those to create the password. So we've got complexity. Also in the complexity, we had the idea of using special characters and some numbers and some letters. So again, creating a whole lot of complexity in that password. The problem is that as threats evolve, the technology that is compromising our networks is getting smarter, and it's doing things to bypass those complex measures. The other side of that is actually on the user responsibility. So what happens when you force someone to create a complex password and they don't want, and they have to use complex passwords everywhere, they don't want to forget them. So they start writing them down places and they leave them insecure. Or they start using the same password for every account. And now if that account gets compromised, they now have a password for everything. And so changing over into something that is simpler and more memorable bypasses the risk of someone writing it down, but it also adds what they're finding is that the complexity may not be as important as the length, because if they're using a random generator to guess the password combinations, the randomness of your password doesn't actually matter. But if your words are seemingly random enough that they can't be placed together, and you have a 10-word phrase, it's going to take much longer to crack than it is if you just had something like Marissa Wayman and a bunch of random numbers.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Does that help clarify?
If it did not help clarify, please feel free to chat me. And then the second question is, are there any services or platforms that we recommend for password storage that are secure?
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there. One of the most common ones used is LastPass. The keys I would say here are, as a business, you want to deploy something that you have central management over, because again, something as sensitive as passwords What you don't want to happen is a person to leave the organization with their passwords. Also, when you use password management tools, some of the cool functionality is sharing passwords. So again, another reason why you would want to have it all on the same account so that you can manage the sharing permissions and you can revoke permissions. WorkSmart has a product that's kind of baked into some of our other solutions that we can offer for password management. So if you're a current client and you're interested to know what we've got to offer, but really having something that's business level is important.
Cool. Thanks, Marissa.
You're welcome. All right. So let's move on to an extension of controlling access. And this is restricting your employees on a need-to-know basis. Because your users are already known, trusted, and have been given access to your important information and systems. And they can, like we said, easily turn that into harming the business, whether it's deliberate or unintentional. So, and like I said, unfortunately, these types of events can be really difficult to detect because they're users you want to be in your environment. So protecting against them is very important. You know, if employees don't have access to personal information as part of their job, there's really no need for them to have it, to have access to it. So restricting access to sensitive data to only those who rely on it for their job function. Goal Financial learned this the hard way. They failed to restrict employee access to personal information stored both in paper files and electronic copies. And as a result, a group of employees transferred over 700 of their consumers' files containing sensitive information to third parties without authorization. That's something there that could be easily prevented by not allowing everyone to have access to it. So to keep that into check, what we recommend is limiting administrative access. And that's you really preventing giving the keys of the kingdom to just anyone or too many people. It also makes your audit process easier. Good security practice to regularly check your administrative users' accounts. At WorkSmart, we have alerting set up. So if if an admin user is created, we're notified because sometimes that's how threats get in, is that they create themselves a admin user account. Having a solid offboarding process is also key to not leaving stale accounts that can then be compromised. So both of those things will really help you into controlling and limiting that access. Other tips for protecting your business, patch management and automated software updates to plug known vulnerabilities, the network security to stop threats from entering and spreading in your network. That's things like firewalls, antivirus, secure VPN for remote access, email spam filtering, properly destroying data so that it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. That's, wiping your hard drive and then removing it from the machine and destroying it. Or you can pay for a disposal, which will give you a certificate of destruction. If you have any questions, we know people. And reliable backups are also a defense against data loss. But when you think about the challenges that we talked about for the modern workplace, these tried and true methods fall a little short. So we need to make sure we are backing up the cloud. If this isn't your first webinar with us, if it isn't your first webinar, you'll know that I love to look for opportunities to get on my soapbox of the dangers of using Microsoft Cloud without a third-party backup. So consider this your warning. Microsoft does not back up your data inherently. You need a third-party backup solution. Also, I know people. Remember the zero-day attacks that Dawn asked us about earlier for the definition? Traditional databases, or I should say traditional database-driven antivirus, cannot keep up with the evolution of threats. So how do you protect against a zero-day threat? Well, the answer is a behavioral-based antivirus, which is adding a layer to kind of to protect against the threats that are intentionally trying to stay under your radar or are just too new for the radar to know they exist. And I will caution you, one does not replace the other. So having a behavior antivirus does not replace the I already know of these viruses, let's protect against them. They work together. So with that, we say modernizing your antivirus. So I mentioned spam filtering, but we need more than that these days. Advanced threat protection measures look for malicious links in your email and attachment scanning. Microsoft 365 has some licensing you can add in place to boost this protection. Filtering your DNS prevents users from accessing malicious sites. This is the idea of keeping your users safe while they're on and browsing the internet. Web filtering is a good thing because that keeps your people from accessing sites that you don't want them to access. But DNS filtering adds another layer based on the domain and the IP address and more technical things. But it keeps you from, again, it's kind of like that, I know there's a vulnerability here, but the best DNS filtering products are going to use something that's referred to as artificial intelligence or machine learning scanning to actually go a step further to look at the web page's behavior to help prevent you from being exposed to malware or ransomware. And one of the examples I love to give people, because we fear ransomware, right? If something gets into your environment and holds all of your data hostage, it encrypts it, and you can't do anything without it until you pay said ransom. DNS filtering actually detects the behavior of the installed program dialing up and calling home to say, hey, send me those encryption keys. It prevents that communication based on how that works on the internet. I like that, how it works, that's the technical phrase, how it works in the interweb somewhere up there. And then this is the easy one, encryption for sensitive data. I kind of struggled with whether this was tried and true or protection for tomorrow. I put it as a protection for tomorrow because I think we need to talk about this more. Information security and data security measures like encryption, whether it's for emails, sensitive data in transit, or if it's for protecting data that lives on your hard drive, this will keep people from accessing data they shouldn't access. I'm gonna take a breath there. What do we have going on, Dawn?
We do not have any questions in the queue right now, but send them in if you got them.
That's right. Well, we're going to move into the best part of the conversation right now, which is, you know, detecting, identifying the incident when it occurs, which is all about knowing when something has gone wrong, because the more quickly you know about it, the faster you can mitigate the impact and return back to normal. So what does that mean? It means monitoring. So just like we do on managed services side, we monitor your infrastructure so we can stay proactive. If we receive an alert or we notice something is starting to fail, we can fix it before it becomes a disaster. Same thing for security, monitoring your computers for unauthorized access, unauthorized devices, unauthorized users, unauthorized everything. Because when you have a password that's compromised and the account is now trying to log in from South Africa and you don't normally log in from South Africa, monitoring can actually help you. It's again what I just mentioned a minute ago about that artificial intelligence, that machine learning, understanding how you use certain things, over time, you will get that that intelligence to help to raise the flag. Like, okay, well, we learned him from South Africa. Is someone on vacation, or has there been an attack or something that's been compromised? This is by far a very simple explanation, but I like to use it because I think it really illustrates how these managed detection and SOC as a service solutions can benefit you. These are, again, when we talked about managed risk, we're talking about another managed solution. So that's the flat monthly fee for the technology and the cyber expertise to be able to sift through all of the information. Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the combination of people, the security experts, and the technology, which is if you've ever heard of SIM, these are log monitoring tools. They're sifting through all of this data. Occasionally, you'll get these red flags that are false positives. And so the managed detection and response platforms, or the SOC as a service, help you weed through all of that data. Well, it doesn't help you weed through it. They do it for you so that they can really hone in on what are actual threats so that we can take next steps, which leads us to the next steps. So response is all about quick action. Once you know the threat exists, you kind of have to stop it. So as such, being prepared to respond will reduce your risks by making you faster to act. And that's why it's important to make and practice an incident response plan to contain an attack. So that an incident response plan is essentially telling you to have a plan for how you're going to notify folks if they've been impacted. That's customers, employees, anyone else that might be impacted. If you're under regulatory GDPR compliance, you might have to report it to a certain agency. Number two is equally as important, which is keeping your business running. Backups for business continuity. Imagine that we had a webinar about backups, and we talked about using your backup solution to kick in and virtualize your environment when your regular environment doesn't work. So you keep running. But while you're running, you also need to make sure your backups continue to work so that when we move into the next phase of truly recovering from the incident, you can go back without losing any data. Reporting the attack to the proper authorities is a good one. This next one, investigating containing attack. So we are up and running, and simultaneously we need to stop the attack from spreading. So things like disconnecting the affected computer and then reaching out to leadership. Having that plan will make sure that you contain the attack appropriately. And then once you've learned as much as you can about what happened, then you update with lessons learned. Well, that's all part of your incident response plan. With any cybersecurity policy or any policy and process, really, remember to share it with your people because they need to know what to expect and how they can play a role in making that successful, even if it's as simple as, I noticed something on my email that doesn't seem right. I know that I need to contact WorkSmart and create a ticket. If they know that that's their first thing, and they're not going to just forward the email internally and then tap Susie on the shoulder and say, hey, have you seen this email? And then she clicks open the attachment and sends it to Bob, who then opens that attachment. That cycle can be disrupted with the right expectations. I sound like a broken record. I may have mentioned expectations before.
Yeah, I know that we touch on this, we've touched on this with other policies, whether it was like backup or communication, communicating in the cloud throughout the series. And I know it sounds really simple, right? Like have a policy and share the policy, but this is probably one of the things that we really recognized wasn't happening super strongly until this pandemic hit. We got a lot of calls from clients with all sorts of questions. and challenges, and a lot of like internal recognition of people not knowing how to use the tools that they had within their system. That's why we kind of continue to bring it back in everything, of have that policy, share the policy, make sure people know how to use the policy and follow the policy, and all of these things.
Yes. And with policies, doing a regular review at least once a year to remind folks to re-sign the policy there, so they are recommitting their level of engagement or their commitment. And it doesn't have to be super detailed and robust. Simple and clear, defined expectations is really what's important. All right, so after the attack, and we've immediately responded, the goal is to return to a full restoration. We want to be back to business as usual. And that is repairing and restoring any parts of your network that have been affected, which is basically recovering data that may have been lost, or restoring capacities of servers or workstations that were impaired, and then of course ensuring that everything functions as intended. You don't want to be caught in a scenario that you think you've remedied the solution and you've restored functionality to everyone, and then you realize that the infection is still there, and now you've reinfected your environment. So ensuring everything is working is super important, and your IT team will absolutely help you navigate this. And if we are your IT team, we're there to help. But when we talk about making it easier for small businesses, there's a couple of things I want to point out here. Dawn said it a minute ago. It's that communication, knowing that something has happened and the steps that are being taken are important. That visibility is so important, because without that communication, your reputation could be damaged very quickly. And the damage to your reputation leads me to plug cybersecurity insurance. I'm not an insurance salesman, but I will ask you to consider cyber insurance, because if your company is hit with an online attack, the damage to your reputation, to your assets, your legal liability could really impact your business. So investing in cybersecurity insurance is a wise precaution, because, and for any size business, especially if you have more sensitive data, to guard yourself against the high costs of an attack. Because the costs of an attack are, like I said, are your reputation, your assets. And we have a great blog article on our website about different types of first-party insurance and what they cover and what they don't cover. So if you're interested in taking your cybersecurity to the next level, let's have a conversation and we'll get you in touch with the right people. The response and the recovery sections were quick. And that is because a lot of that work has to happen in those first 3 stages. We have to identify, we have to set those policies, we have to protect our equipment. We need to have the right measures in place to be able to find those incidents when they occur, so we can identify the ones that are actual threats, so that we can respond and recover quickly. And doing the regular testing is so important to make sure that all 5 of those components work together seamlessly in the way that you're intending them to. So as I said earlier, you can revise regularly.
Hey Marissa, hold up just a second. So we got a chat message that asks if anybody else has lost sound. So if you can still hear me, if you wouldn't mind just sending me a quick chat. Looks like it's back. Okay, cool. So we're good.
Oh, and thank you for dropping that blog article into the chat.
Yeah, cool. Yes, I did. I dropped the cybersecurity blog article that Marissa was referring to into the chat box for everyone. So if you want to take a look at that, you are absolutely welcome.
Yes. So just as a real quick reminder, and just go through these real quickly. We have the identify to understanding your risk. Helps if I click on the right screen. We're identifying your risk. We're protecting. We are identifying when an event occurs so that we can take action and restore our business back to the norm. And that's all I have prepared for today. I'd love to answer some questions though.
Yeah, cool. If you have, I know that we're right about at the end of time. I don't currently have any questions in the queue from anyone, but Marissa and I are cool to hang for a couple more minutes. So if you have questions, feel free to type them furiously. And Marissa, while people are doing that, would you mind bopping over to the next slide?
I have no problem doing that.
Thanks.
Dun, dun, dun.
Ta-da. Yeah, okay. So we are coming up on the end of the Back to the Future series. It's sad, but it's okay because we are always creating new things here at WorkSmart, and we've got some really good stuff coming up down the pipeline after the series ends. But there's 2 more episodes in the Back to the Future series, including one for next week, which Marissa mentioned, called Fish Proof. This is a really, really good, this is actually going to be a training. This is going to be a really good episode for you to invite your users, your teammates, your employees to. We want to talk to the everyday people in your office because we spend a lot of time talking about cybersecurity to the administrators of the office, right? And we want to talk to the people because, as Marissa mentioned, 43% of cyber attacks actually come from everyday users. And we want to talk to like all of those people in your office, and we want to show them, here's how you know if it's a phishing email or not. Here's how to create a strong password. So all of these things that we're saying, go back and tell your end users we still want you to do, but we would also love for them to join us next week. And they'll get to see some stuff like that live. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a training, and we hope that we invite all of your people. So definitely join us next week. And then the following week is the last episode in the series. It's called That's a Wrap. I know, it's so sad. But we're excited that Clay Harris, our COO and president, will be joining us again. To chat about his perspective as a local business guru, entrepreneur, about the future of small business and the modern workplace. So we do these leadership surveys with our clients, I believe monthly, every other month. I'm not sure what the cadence is right now, but all about stuff that's happening and trends that are happening in small businesses. So we'll share some of that info there. We'll share some info that he's got from his other networking groups and all of that fun stuff. So join us for both of those. And if you can't make it live, but you still want the content, as always, you can register for the event just like you would to attend, and you'll get the recording afterward, or you can email me and I'd be happy to get you set up with that. And with that, I believe that's all we have for today. So thank you all so much for joining us. Marissa, you were fabulous as always.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we're good. Like, I was trying to think of another Toy Story pun and I lost it. But cool, awesome. You have a friend in IT. There we go. We hope you all have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Well, thanks for joining.